He's Hollywood's ultimate tough guy. Clint Eastwood, the man with no name, Dirty Harry, the Oscar-winning director who's become a living legend. At 94, he's seen and done it all in Hollywood. But behind the legend is a complicated father, who has 8 children from multiple relationships. One of those children is Scott Eastwood, a rising actor who has spoken openly about his difficult relationship with his famous father. The relationship between Clint and Scott has been marked by distance, tough love, and challenges that most Hollywood families never discuss publicly. Now, as Clint enters his 90s, the full story of their complicated bond is finally coming to light. This isn't a story about disownment. It's about a much more complex reality of a Hollywood icon who raised his children with an old-school mentality that left lasting impacts. If you want to understand the real dynamics behind one of Hollywood's most complicated father-son relationships, hit that subscribe button. Now let's explore the truth about Clint and Scott Eastwood to understand the relationship between Clint and Scott Eastwood. We need to start with Scott's unusual childhood growing up as the unacknowledged son of one of the world's biggest movie stars. Scott Eastwood was born Scott Clinton Reeves on March 21, 1986, in Monterey, California. His mother was Jocelyn Reeves, a flight attendant who had a relationship with Clint Eastwood in the mid-1980s. Unlike some of Clint's other children, Scott didn't grow up with the Eastwood name. He was raised by his mother in Hawaii. Far from Hollywood's spotlight and from his famous father's public life, Scott has spoken about how his father was largely absent during his childhood. Clint was busy with his career, had other relationships and children, and Scott saw him only occasionally during brief visits. Scott's mother raised him and his sister Catherine in Hawaii, giving them a relatively normal childhood away from Hollywood. Scott has described his upbringing as regular working jobs, surfing, and not having the privileges many assumed came with being Clint Eastwood's son. Scott always knew Clint Eastwood was his father, but he grew up watching his dad on movie screens rather than having him present in daily life. This created a strange disconnect between the public icon and the absent father. Clint's parenting philosophy was built on the idea that his children should make their own way in the world. For Scott, this meant no handouts, no using the Eastwood name to get ahead, and no expectation of help from his famous father. Scott worked regular jobs growing up: construction work, bartending, valet, parking, while his father was worth hundreds of millions. Scott was expected to support himself without financial assistance. As Scott grew older, he began to feel resentment about his father's absence and the tough love approach that felt more like neglect. He watched his father be present in other families while remaining distant from his own. Scott has described having complicated feelings about his father, pride in Clint's accomplishments mixed with hurt over his absence, admiration for his work ethic combined with anger about the emotional distance. When Scott decided to pursue acting, he knew it would be inevitable that comparisons to his father would follow, but he was determined to succeed on his own merits, partly because he knew his father would offer no shortcuts. Scott Eastwood's journey into Hollywood wasn't paved by his father's connections. Instead, it was marked by rejection, struggle, and a determination to prove himself without the help of the Eastwood name. Scott moved to Los Angeles to pursue acting in his early 20s. Unlike some celebrity children who get immediate opportunities, Scott faced the same grind as any unknown actor: countless auditions, rejections, and small roles. Initially, Scott auditioned under his birth name, Scott Reeves, deliberately avoiding association with his father. He wanted roles based on his talent, not his parentage. Clint offered no help with Scott's career. No phone calls to directors, no roles in his films initially, no leveraging his industry connections. Scott has said his father's attitude was, "If you want to be an actor, figure it out yourself." Scott's early roles were tiny, uncredited parts, background work, brief appearances in television shows. He was building experience the hard way, just like thousands of other aspiring actors. Scott's first credited role in a Clint Eastwood film was a small part in Flags of Our Fathers, 2006, followed by another small role in Gran Torino, 2008. But these weren't favors. Scott still had to audition like everyone else. When Scott did work on his father's films, Clint treated him like any other actor on set, perhaps even more harshly. Scott has described his father being tougher on him than on other cast members, refusing to show favoritism. Slowly, Scott began landing bigger roles in films like The Longest Ride, Suicide Squad, and The Fate of the Furious. Each role was earned through auditions and his own developing reputation, not family connections. The constant comparisons to his father were both a burden and a motivation. Interviewers always asked about Clint, casting directors saw the resemblance, and audiences had expectations based on the Eastwood name. Scott worked to develop his own acting style and screen presence. Distinct from his father's iconic minimalism, he wanted to be known as Scott Eastwood, not just Clint's son. Even as his career progressed, Scott maintained financial independence. His father's wealth didn't support his lifestyle. He lived on what he earned, sometimes struggling to make rent between acting jobs. Scott began speaking more publicly about his relationship with his father, describing the tough love approach and lack of support. These comments sparked discussion about Clint's parenting methods. Through Scott's interviews, it became clear that there was significant distance between father and son. While not a complete estrangement, their relationship was far from the warm, supportive dynamic that many assumed. The relationship between Clint and Scott represents more than just father-son tension. It's a clash between old Hollywood values and modern expectations, between tough love parenting and a generation seeking emotional connection. Clint Eastwood was raised during the Great Depression and came of age in the 1950s. His parenting philosophy reflects that era. Children should be self-reliant, emotions shouldn't be openly expressed, and success requires struggle without help. Clint's approach to his children was essentially sink or swim. He believed that helping them too much would weaken them, and that they needed to face the same challenges he had faced to develop character and resilience. Scott, born in 1986, represents a generation with different expectations about parenting. He wanted emotional connection, presence, and support, not just financial independence, lessons and tough love from a distance. Scott has spoken about the emotional distance in their relationship. Clint isn't naturally expressive or emotionally demonstrative, and Scott has described feeling like he had to prove himself constantly without receiving validation or encouragement for Clint. Not helping Scott's career was a form of respect, treating him like anyone else. For Scott, it felt like abandonment or lack of interest in his success and well-being. A particularly painful incident occurred when Scott's girlfriend died in a car accident in 2014. Scott has indicated that his father's response to this tragedy wasn't as emotionally supportive as he needed. Highlighting the emotional gap between them, Clint's public persona as a tough, stoic icon extended into his private life as a father. What works on screen doesn't always work in family relationships, and Scott felt the limitations of having a father who couldn't step out of that role. Clint has 8 children from multiple relationships. Managing these complex family dynamics, especially when some children were acknowledged publicly earlier than others, created inequality and resentment among siblings. Scott's willingness to speak publicly about his father's parenting has been both criticized and praised. Some see it as airing family business. Others view it as honest discussion about how parenting styles affect children. Clint has largely remained silent about his relationship with Scott, consistent with his private nature and discomfort with emotional discussions. This silence has left Scott's perspective as the primary public narrative. The Clint-Scott dynamic demonstrates that legendary careers don't automatically create healthy family relationships, and that the qualities that make someone a great artist don't necessarily translate to effective parenting. As Clint Eastwood approaches his mid-90s and Scott continues building his career, the reality of their relationship is more nuanced than tabloid. Headlines about disownment suggest, despite sensational headlines, Clint never formally disowned Scott. The reality is more complex. A distant relationship marked by different values, limited emotional connection, and Clint's tough love philosophy that left Scott feeling unsupported. Scott and Clint still have contact, attending some family events together and maintaining a relationship, even if it's not as close as Scott might wish. It's complicated rather than completely severed. As Scott has matured, his public comments about his father have become more balanced. He acknowledges both the difficulties of their relationship and his understanding of why his father parented the way he did. Scott has expressed understanding that his father was raised differently and that Clint's parenting reflected his own upbringing and values, even if Scott wished it had been different. While Clint rarely speaks about family matters publicly, those close to him suggest he believes his tough love approach helped his children develop strength and independence. Even if they sometimes resented it, Scott has acknowledged that his father's refusal to help forced him to develop resilience and work ethic that have served his career. The approach was painful but possibly effective in building character. Scott has achieved moderate success as an actor, building a career based on his own work rather than his father's connections. In this sense, Clint's approach accomplished what it intended. Scott's success is genuinely his own. The broader Eastwood family dynamic remains complex, with multiple children from different relationships navigating their connections to their famous father and to each other. The Eastwood father-son relationship offers lessons about the importance of balancing independence with emotional support and how parenting styles that work in one era may not meet the needs of later generations. Despite the emotional distance and past hurts, Scott clearly respects his father's accomplishments and legacy, even as he wishes their relationship had been different. As both men age Clint, entering his 90s, Scott approaching middle age, there's potential for deeper understanding and perhaps closer connection. Though significant change seems unlikely given established patterns, the Clint and Scott Eastwood story isn't about disownment or scandal, it's about how different generations understand family, how tough love parenting affects children long-term, and how even legends struggle with the most universal human challenge, relationships. At 94, Clint Eastwood hasn't suddenly admitted a secret about Scott because there's no scandal to admit. The truth is simply that he parented with old-school values that prioritized independence over emotional connection, and that approach, while creating resilience, also created distance that both father and son continue. Navigating the relationship between Clint Eastwood and his son Scott isn't a story of disownment or scandal. It's the far more common and relatable story of a parent and child with different values, needs, and expectations struggling to understand each other across generational divides. Clint's tough love approach, while creating the independence and work ethic he valued, also created emotional distance that his son struggled with. Scott's openness about these struggles has sparked important conversations about how parenting styles affect children and how even the most successful people can struggle with family relationships. Their story reminds us that being a legend in your profession doesn't automatically make you perfect in your personal life, and that the values that drive professional success don't always translate to family happiness. If this exploration of Hollywood's most complicated father-son relationship resonated with you, please share this video and subscribe for more honest looks at the real stories behind celebrity families. Thanks for watching. And remember, every family has its complications, even legendary ones.